Okay, yes, you read the title of this video correctly. I am actually going to try to defend the no. And I don't just mean the no that Darth Vader says at the end of Revenge of the Sith. I'm gonna actually try to defend, hear me out, George Lucas throwing in the no at the end of Return of the Jedi in the recent Blu-ray release. Now, I know this is futile, but before you start downvoting my video and leaving hateful comments, I'm gonna say it right now. When I first heard that this is what George Lucas was doing, I was as mad as anybody else. I was repulsed. But I thought about it, and I'm going to make this video where I'm going to try to defend, first of all, his right as a filmmaker to do this, and secondly, I'm going to discuss whether the artistic motivation behind putting it in was actually valid. Now, you can disagree, you can think that even if it's true, he still shouldn't have, that's fine, but all I'm going to say in this video is that there can be a defense made of those decisions and of his right to do them. That there is an artistic basis for throwing in the no. Now, the first thing I have to defend is that George Lucas has any artistic reasons for editing the movies at all. Recently, a fairly damning speech that he made back in 1988 has surfaced where he says, quote, "People who alter or destroy works of art and our cultural heritage for profit or as an exercise of power are barbarians." Well, how ironic is that, because isn't that what George Lucas is doing? Well, notice he says, people who alter or destroy works of art for profit or an exercise of power. Now, if you think that Lucas is just editing the movies because he has a sense of power, that's your prerogative, I guess, but it seems really silly to me to say that he's doing it for profit. Lucas, if nothing else, is a pretty savvy businessman, and he has to know that his edits are not going over well with the fan community, with the nerd community, with the Star Wars fan base. And conversely, I have a lot of trouble believing that he's sitting there going, you know, there are some people who wouldn't buy the Star Wars Blu-ray set, but maybe if I throw in a no and make the Ewoks blink, they'll be interested. I mean, come on, people, he's a lot smarter than that. So, if he has inserted new things into the films, it must be because he thinks, rightly or wrongly, that the film needs them, they can be improved by them. And if you're going to criticize Lucas as a barbarian for going back and editing his own movies according to what he thinks, would be better for them, are you going to criticize any director with a director's cut? Are you going to criticize Ridley Scott for his 7,000 plus versions of Blade Runner? What about Steven Spielberg?
Close Encounters is a movie that Spielberg has never really finished with. Even after it became an all-time box office hit, he went back to it and added some more scenes taken inside the spaceship, changed some of the earlier moments of the film, and brought out what he called the final version of Close Encounters.
Now, some people might argue that Lucas may truly think his movies need some improvement, but that doesn't mean much because he's not much of a filmmaker. Those people are wrong. You may not agree with Lucas's decisions, but they at least deserve the benefit of the doubt, especially because the whole thing's his brainchild in the first place. Even though everyone knows this, I may as well review. Nobody liked, for the most part, Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but critics more or less acclaimed Revenge of the Sith. Nevertheless, there was a huge backlash against this moment. This moment was so infamous that a friggin' cult sprung up around it. There was even a fan-made documentary just about people's responses to that damn scene. It was notorious, and Kevin Smith here explains why.
Look, I fucking love me some Revenge of the Sith, but that was like the silliest moment in that movie. And there are things you can attack about that movie that I'll defend and shit, but there is no defense against... No! Just because you've never heard Darth Vader be like that. Darth Vader, even when he loses, the end of Empire Strikes Back is just pimped out on the bridge and shit, looking out the window like, I'll get him sooner or later. But fucking like to see him break down like a whiny emo bitch, just... No! That was kind of indefensible.
So how am I going to defend the indefensible? Well, actually, he makes the point for me. We've never seen Vader do anything like this, and this is actually, I will say, a problem with the original trilogy. Yes, I'm going to maintain that there are one or two minor problems with the original trilogy. And one of them is that even though Luke continually insists that there is some good left in his father, we never see any indication of that. We have to be told repeatedly. In fact, Riff Tracks even makes fun of this in their commentary on the film.
I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it from you fully.
Sure, you've killed Mom and about 10 billion others, but deep down...
I think Lucas realized this and saw a need to remedy it, partially with the help of the prequel trilogy. Together, all the 6 films essentially form a narrative arc about Anakin Skywalker's fall and ultimate redemption. In the first movie, Anakin is a vulnerable little kid. He's annoying, maybe, but he's incontestably virtuous, maybe to a fault. This is best represented by his puppy-lovish crush on Padme, and I have to admit, this is really stupid dialogue.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe. They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
You're a funny little boy.
Over the next couple of movies after The Phantom Menace, Anakin, progressively becomes a bigger and bigger dick. Goes deeper and deeper into the dark side, and more of his ties to the light side are broken. His mother dies, his relationship with Obi-Wan kind of falls apart, etc., etc. The only thing that's really holding him on is Padme. She's kind of the one hook that still has him connected to goodness. The moment she dies, the deal's really sealed between him and the dark side. That's really when it's going to determine who he's going to be for the rest of his life. That's what's going to determine whether there's any soul left in him at all. And if he hadn't reacted with horror to the knowledge that she had been killed by him, I think that there'd be nothing left really in his soul. I think that would be a statement that anything left that was good in Anakin Skywalker really had died, which would mean that Luke was completely wrong in insisting that there was good left in him, and it would make the ending of Return of the Jedi totally incomprehensible. The fact that he does shout, "No," indicates that he does feel extreme guilt and remorse over his wife's death, that there is still that speck of humanity, of that, that point of light in his night of darkness kind of a thing. Does it seem silly? Well, yeah, but maybe that's kind of the point. It's sort of incongruous that this Sith Lord, this badass, has a little kid crying inside him, the little Anakin, still wrapped up somewhere in there. That's the whole point, that there is something contradictory in Darth Vader, that there's a little bit of goodness left, and that's what's going to end up coming back at the end of the second trilogy. The reason that I keep harping at the fact that this parallels the end of Return of the Jedi is because Lucas keeps emphasizing the fact in interviews that these movies are supposed to echo each other. They're supposed to rhyme. They're supposed to be poetry. So naturally, Return of the Jedi is going to echo Revenge of the Sith. It's right there in the title. Now, in Revenge of the Sith, we see Anakin become Darth Vader. In Return of the Jedi, we see Darth Vader revert back to Anakin Skywalker. Now that we have a picture that fleshes out the story more, I don't see any problem in George Lucas retconning to make there a stronger and more obvious link between the two. In Revenge of the Sith, in chronologically the first movie, when he shouts no, he starts destroying everything around him other than the Emperor, because there's nothing left for him otherwise. The only thing he has left to do is just wreak havoc and destruction wantonly and devote himself to the Palpatine, who's the only one left for him. Now he has something left of his love with Padme. He has Luke now. He has Leia. He now has the only thing that was keeping him back from evil back again. And now when he shouts no, now when he exerts himself, rather than destroying things wantonly, he just focuses on destroying the Emperor. It forms a really nice symmetry, honestly. Now, I want you to ask yourself honestly, if I haven't convinced you yet, I want you to think, if you had been a kid watching Return of the Jedi, and instead of just silently throwing the Emperor into the pit, Darth Vader had shouted no then, if this wasn't a new edition, would you have noticed? Would it have seemed weird to you? Would you have minded? Would it have been anywhere near as weird as this?
Take these two over to the garage, will you? I want them cleaned up for dinner.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Can you imagine if Lucas had added that line in the later editions? Oh, he'd be bashed, like, to no end for adding an annoying line, but because we grew up with it, it's, like, charming and endearing, right? That's the thing, people. The reason you're rebelling so violently against this is not, I don't think, for the most part, because you really think, that Lucas is in some way defiling Star Wars. Now, there are some cases where I can understand, like what he's done with some of the lightsaber battles and so on and so forth, where you think maybe he's been untrue to, his own vision. But honestly, and let's say you don't agree with me here, maybe you think that the integrity of the scene is wrecked, that Vader has to be kind of stoic and silent as he destroys the Emperor. Okay. Are you really laying awake at night, bothered about the fact that Ewoks blink now? That was really like a central, dowel that you hung your enjoyment of Return of the Jedi on in the future. I'm sorry, nobody cares. The only reason you mind is because he's mucking around with your childhood. I understand. Okay? I'm coming from the same perspective as you. Like most of you, I would imagine, one of my first exposures to nerdiness when I was very young and tender was Star Wars. In fact, I think I still... Yes, I do. I still have my first diary ever, which was this. Yep, the old school cover. And I think I even still have the day I got this journal. It was December 25th. Look, people, I know where you're coming from, you know, on the instinctual gut level. But just step back for, you know, a minute. Do you really think that Lucas is, like, out to defile your childhood? This is his creation. He thinks he can find a way to make it better for the future generations. Now, there are some ways in which I think he's screwed up, and there are some ways in which I think he's legitimately improved it. I think the new Jabba scene in New Hope is awesome, for example. I think the Sarlacc pit kicks ass now. I'd like for him to release the original theatrical cut. That would be awesome. But he's not... You have to understand where you're coming from. You have to manage to be somewhat objective when you critically evaluate these films. And I'm sorry, I do not think that Darth Vader shouting no at the end of Return of the Jedi constitutes any kind of sin. A perfect example of this is people's reaction to what Lucas did to the final scene of Return of the Jedi. Originally, it depicted the ghost of Anakin Skywalker as played by Sebastian Shaw, who famously played Darth Vader once he had his helmet off, but Lucas edited it so that now it is Hayden Christensen. People claim this was disrespectful to Sebastian Shaw. I'm sorry, but I really think that's bullshit for the most part. If you're talking about respect to the actors, and I agree, I mean, Sebastian Shaw was amazing, you know, in his single scene as Darth Vader, then you ought to be just as pissed off about David Prowse. David Prowse was the guy inside the Darth Vader costume, and Lucas went behind his back to get James Earl Jones to do the voiceover. Now, if you listen to his voice, you can see why.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive!
George Lucas threw an actor under the bus for the sake of his own personal vision of what Star Wars ought to be. And you know why you don't mind, honestly? It's because you grew up with James Earl Jones, so you don't mind that Prowse got shafted in that. And I don't blame you. I don't either. But don't try to, like, masquerade it as, like, film criticism or as, you know, believing that he's defiling art. It's the fact that you grew up with this and you don't want to sacrifice it or have to give it up. Now, some people might argue that even though Star Wars is technically George Lucas's creation, now it's entered into a sort of public domain of the spirit. We all have sort of shared in the experience, and therefore, in a way, it belongs to us as well, and he shouldn't kind of double-cross us like this by doing stuff we don't want him to do with it. Here's the thing. He's not the first one to reinvent a myth. Shakespeare, Virgil, and Homer all took, you know, previously existing stories and reinvented them for their own means. The question is, did they do it well or not? And that's what we have to judge Lucas on the basis of. Did he reinvent Star Wars well? And you can't, you know, write it off just because it's not what you're used to, or what has sentimental value for you. Finally, as much as George Lucas is derided as a monster nowadays by the nerd community, I really do think that whether or not history will vindicate him, he will be remembered fondly. He will be remembered for what he did right, more so than what he did wrong. And if you doubt me, think of Gene Roddenberry. Nowadays he's thought of as the creator of Star Trek. He's thought of very fondly, even though a bunch of his projects failed. And when a lot of people thought that he was not a very good writer, didn't really understand Star Trek, and he also made a movie that a lot of Trekkies hated. And yet nowadays, he's a hero. And I have faith that George Lucas will have the same fate. This is where I'm supposed to end with some joke to the effect of, you know, and if you disagree with me, all I have to say to you is no! But I'm above such jokes. Take care.